Good morning and welcome back. Thank you for coming. Today we're going to paint the figure, and I'm going to start with this palette. Now, I've mixed up the general skin tones that I use. It is... Okay, so here we go. I'm going to continue with this flake white replacement from Gamblin to see if I like it, just because it's the first layer, although I have a feeling I'm going to change to the titanium white on the second layers of paint. And okay, this is my source red umber, and this is my source burnt umber. I think the brands on both of those, in case you're curious, are Old Holland. So I understand it's relatively an expensive brand, but to be honest, as a sculptor, I really don't have a lot of patience for painters complaining about how expensive everything gets, because in the reality of things, the frame is the most expensive part of all the materials. Painters get paid for their ideas, for their vision, for their execution. Sculptors end up getting paid for labor, and it's a different kind of thing, because we also don't make so much, and the market's much smaller. So I don't have patience for that, especially being both of them. I'm buying both kinds of supplies. But anyway, use the best quality paints that you can afford, because they're going to, in the long run, be a lot better for you. And if you train on a different sort of paint, when you do decide you have enough money to buy the good quality stuff, then you kind of have to get used to a different strength of pigment, and you might as well just use the best you can all the time, because then you understand more about the paints and you grow faster, because you're not always changing what your materials are. So burnt umber, red umber, white. I've made sort of 4 skin tones. Okay, this is the skin tone base, which is the skin in light but the darker version. You want to have this dark enough so that you have some color to your pigment, to your skin, because otherwise you're going to have a pasty figure. I can kind of put my skin up here and you can sort of see. Now, hands are a little bit maybe redder than most, but still, do you see that my skin is actually quite darker than you might imagine, just as yours probably is. And then, you know, there are places where you're going to have a highlight stuff. You don't want your light skin to be too washed out looking. I mean, you can in certain situations, and depending on what the idea is. The dark here, this is burnt umber with red umber mixed together, and no white. And this is with a little bit of white. The main thing is the darks need to be darker than the lights, okay? And I'll be mixing and playing with a lot of them, and I hope at the transition lines I'll do something even more fun. So we'll see you in a bit. What I would like to do is see if I can change the position of this camera so that you're a lot closer to the board, and or at least a little bit closer. So you don't really need to see me at all. Just to see if this is something that interests you, that actually maybe teaches more, because I don't know if this distance shows you what you need to show. Okay, so let me finish this and we'll get started. Okay, to show you the other angle here, trying to avoid the glare. This is the palette that I'm going to be using for the skin tone. It is the red umber and titanium white for the lights, skin and light. The skin and shadow is going to be, oh goodness, that was terrible. The skin and shadow is going to be burnt umber, red umber, and the titanium white mixture. And then you'll see where the cheeks, things like where blood gets together, the cheeks, fingertips, which actually you don't see here, and knees, if I had put them in, they have a wee bit of Prussian, Venetian red added, or Persian red added to give it a little bit of warmth where the blood goes to the skin. So that's an idea there. Goodness, this is so grainy, I'm sorry, I really need a new camera. Okay, I hope this is a little bit better and maybe a little bit more straight on before, because I know there's distortion in the lens as well. I'm going to, okay, you can see here maybe a little bit close up more of the rocks, and the sad thing is they're kind of growing on me, but I'm going to keep going. So I'm going to put the reference piece up here where it's out of the way of the skin, and I'm hoping that that tape has enough stick to stay, but not so much stick as to put nasty stuff on my on my board. All right, instead of using a palette knife for this, I'm going to go ahead and use a brush. And I would like to use a fairly big brush at this point to cover some real estate fairly quickly. So my first step is going to be to design the dark shapes, or at least separate what I'm going to consider dark and what I'm going to consider light. And can you see that? Yeah. Let's do a little bit of study here of the figure, okay? Most of his figure is actually in some sort of light, because this is a daylight. The majority of the light is coming from this direction. You can tell because this extended leg here is catching a lot of light on the top plane of the thigh, as well as the arm here, which is moving away from us towards his opposite leg. There's light coming there because it's in a diagonal right here. It's receiving light. So that tells me the light's coming from here, not from here. But it's coming from here and also flat down on the thigh here, okay? I can see that on the shoulder, it's light on this edge and a little bit of light here, but I see also the shadow is going in this direction. So that's another indicator the sun is coming from this way. However, do you see that he doesn't have harsh shadows here on his thigh, which is opposite? If the light's coming from here, it's highlighting this section of his leg, but this is not really much in shadow. This light is because his hip is out enough to catch the light here, and it wraps around dark as it goes underneath the bum and behind the back. But note that the leg here is not really terribly dark. Certainly not as dark as this lower leg, which is catching shadow from the leg above it as well. So that's blocking light from entering. But what it means is that daylight, you have light bouncing all around. So really, this is not what I would consider a shadow. It's more of a halftone. The same way that most of his hand here is in a light, and it's just this wee bit of the elbow and a little bit here of the triceps, and then the dark line separating the physical shape of the arm against the physical shape of the body. There is that separation, and that's a little darker there. And then you see dark underneath the leg, the foot here on the bottom side, because the sun's coming this way, and even though the light is also bouncing this way, it's getting part of that leg, but not all of it. So the part that's actually physically underneath is dark. And then this arm is almost completely in shadow, save for a wee bit of light maybe bouncing on this side of it. You can see on the hand there how that goes. So anyway, and there's more bouncing light there. So it's going to be an interesting thing. Now, what I find easier to help me design the shapes of the darks is to squint, because again, this is a dark here in the back, but at some point it goes up and it becomes a halftone, okay? How you design the dark and light is your own personal voice coming through and your choices that you're making. And so there's no necessarily right or wrong thing. It's partly you, but you're the artist, you're the boss, okay? So I'm going to come in here, and all right, I was going to start with the dark on the hand, but one thing I was saying earlier is that, to me, when I looked at this arm, the upper arm here, my first instinct was it looks too thin compared to this. Now, the elbow is a joint, so you're going to tend to have a little bit of wideness happening in there. The thing is, every time I see something such as that and I say, oh, this is too thin, I always want to reevaluate, take a look at it and say, is this part too thin, or is it that the lower arm is too fat? Because it could be a little of both. It could be, relatively speaking, if I made this arm too large, it would be too large for the body, and then I would need to slender the arm down. So what is it? Let's take a look at that. In this case, I'm going to look at the negative shapes, look at the width of the hand compared to the hips, compared to the shoulder, compared to the other, and decide on this which shape that I think this is. In this case, I'm going to go with the fact that I think I don't have enough curve here in the elbow joint, and then it goes in a little bit where the tendons grab our muscles. The belly of the muscle is closer to the torso always. And not always, obviously, but there are smaller muscles. But you have a band that wraps things around. That's why when you do a bicep thing, you have a curve here, and then you have a little flat space. Those are tendons. So he's got a little outie for the elbow, and it comes in, and then it starts to go out in a curve again. Not dramatic, because he's not muscular. He's a wee bit of a boy. So, again, I'm going to start with the lighter of the two darks, because again I'm wanting a high key painting and I haven't put anything in there, so I'm going to save the darkest darks for later. And then this, okay, I'm going to paint into the leaf a little bit that's in front of him, and I don't mind it. It's a little bit shocking at this point, to be honest. And the whole arm seems to be in shadow except for a little bit on the edge here. Okay, and then it's going to go in at the elbow and give some light at the elbow. Now, here's another thing. I don't know if you can see this on the video, but if I actually paint with thick paint, this looks like a solid, sort of actually dull kind of brown. If I start getting too thin here, do you see how the warmth in the pigment comes out? So this is getting a little bit too orangey here because I don't have enough paint. And even though I want translucency and stuff, I really need to make sure that I don't use too many spirits, first of all. And other than that, get in here. So, all right, so let's continue to study this. I can go about down to the wrist. And again, I'm going to leave this edge here. It's difficult for me to see at this point, but because normally I don't like a totally flowing design of a shadow line. What I mean is I don't want a straight line here. It's just kind of boring and it doesn't work. And usually there's a muscle that stops in here somewhere and I can get a little bit of variation on the shape. And that's kind of what interests me, frankly. Okay. So right now I will refine this as we go along. At this point, I'm not going to worry about this sharp edge here because it's going to pull his body out. But you know what, I'm changing my mind on that. I think because this is an opportunity to connect him to the background, I'm going to soften this a bit. And I can sharpen it later as I develop the form. I also don't want this ridge in between the leaf. Okay. And I don't think that most painting teachers will tell you use your finger. It's not, again, it's not healthy more than probably anything else because the oils, the natural oils that are on your finger I find are actually perfect for blending things. I like them in clay sculpture, I like them in painting, and they're always with you. You know, it's kind of sweet. I'm glad it works out that way. Okay, now, again, this looks really garishly dark to me at this point. It could be relative because it's new, but in fact, I think I'm going to lighten it up a little bit more because I think for a high-key painting, it probably is too dark. The problem I have with that is that sometimes I have a hard time keeping the darks, and that I'm not real crazy about either. Now see, as I go to add stuff in, it's going to be... The other thing is it's really easy to see things when they're subtle, but, I mean, when they're contrasty, but subtle is a whole new ballgame. So I'm lightening it there. I don't know if that shows up well, but I can see that the color, the white that I've added is actually working. And I did mention earlier I like to mix paints on the canvas, but I don't necessarily go into a dark like this and say, oh, let me just put the white in and put the white right on the canvas. I mix it with the base color a little bit because if you don't, you end up having something that's just, it's too garishly different and it just doesn't work. I'm looking at the contrast of these two and going, whoa. In here I kind of go, whoa, but not dramatically like this. However, I know this is a process, and so I'm gonna keep on with this until I get something I'm pleased with. Now, this is where you start to check your drawing as you're painting, because I probably should have done as we were sort of taught, and to do the charcoal drawing here and design everything like that and then add the paint. But you start to connect a few points here and there, and you know where you're going at some point. So now what I've lost in my drawing here, because I was trying to move the elbow back and not have this kiss of the shapes right in this point here. I wanted it to be more of a thing. I lost the upward angle of this the elbow as it goes back, because he's just got kind of a little point of an elbow, and then it sort of is a little fatty thing. So I'm going to exaggerate this little curve here a little bit, get that in there, and you'll notice that underneath the elbow it's light because it's hitting the stomach that's actually in front of his arm, because his arm is going, you know, behind his rib cage a little bit. So I'm going to pull this in. I don't want to touch anything down here if I can avoid it, because that's a good place to have a nice sharp edge to differentiate one form in front of the other, the arm in front of the torso. Those are completely separate objects, as you wish. And so that is the time to have a sharper line. It's where you have things like this fold in the crease here that it makes nice softness is better here. So I'm going to come down, and now I've got a darker shadow that's up here. Because his elbow isn't clamped right up against his body, down in this area, you'll see that there's the dark shadow kind of ends a little bit up into the arm, and then it spreads out, and then it's just getting lightens as it goes. The elbow goes away from the body. Now, the other thing I wanted to point out is in this stage, I don't differentiate between what's behind the arm, and right now I'm designing the shadow shape itself. So I'm coming up from the elbow. I'm actually into the arm right now. And theoretically, I should treat this as one big abstract shape. Okay? So there you go, my little ciondolini. That's what the Italian word for dangling things, which was a fun lesson to learn the way that I learned it. So that sounded naughtier than it was. It was related to naughty stuff, but it wasn't as naughty as that. Okay, I'm also keeping it thin here, and even though I said I don't want to go into the orange stuff here, I'm okay with this. This is dark enough to be dark. Alright, so the other dark place, again, I don't have a lot of them. Most of these dark spaces are actually halftones, even in the neck. There's a slight bit behind the ear, but those are small enough that I think I'm going to push them off for now. I want to come back into the back. Now, one thing I've been curious about is, maybe it's where I drew the pencil over the image, but I can't really understand what's going on with the bum there. I think maybe there's a slight line of a curve where I can see a little bit of the cheek on the far end from me. And then it curves into the small of the back. But in any regard, this is getting bouncing light. The shadow might actually be coming up here. But again, there's more light bouncing off of this rock up into his skin. You see this is lighter here, and it goes up darker, more in the small of the back. So I'm just going to kind of keep that. And it's got where the waist goes, you kind of see it gets a little bit lighter. So that's before the leg finishes. So I'm just going to kind of, it's kind of a round shape because there's a muscle in there that's causing that to do that. And then generally I'm going to go up the back. Now, I've got the spine, and it's really difficult because it really looks to me more like a halftone than an actual shadow. Up here, though, I can see a sliver of dark tone that's going from the edge of the body, painting with no paint again, and the edge of the body up into this plant, and it's kind of coming down until it starts to get a little bit more light, and then the dark moves into the spine. So in the meantime, I can put some of this dark in here. Okay, and it's a call how far up I want to go for this to be a dark shade, but you can start to see some indication of his ribs. There's a little bit of darkness there underneath one of the rib separations, but in general you've got a bar, so to speak, of this, and then just a wee bit of dark. But so the thing is, I want to keep all of these edges soft, because in the torso here, I'm within the form. You don't want a hard edge within the same form. This is all the back. It's all one cylinder, basically. So I want to keep this shape form. Here, I'm in shadow, but I've got arm versus imp, but I'll work on that later. But right now, this part, the left side of this shadow, is actually a part of the arm. So I want to make sure that this edge here is soft, because I don't want the arm to look like a cube. If you have a hard edge here, this is a plane and that is a plane, and that makes it look more rectangle than round. Okay? Alright, so everything in the hand I see is quite light, and the hair is a different animal, so I'm not going to worry about it. I could put in a little bit of the darks here for the ear, but it's really so minimal, and of course it'll come up here for his neck. I'm not worried that I'm painting over grass. I painted over the grass not knowing exactly where I wanted things to go. Okay, now I'm going to come in to the legs, and I can see that underneath this curve here, it's dark. There's just not much light getting in between the fold of his skin with the leg. And then I'm going to continue to go down here. A wee bit of spirits there. I like to paint thin at this stage also because, not just because in general I paint thinly, but because also I may stand back and look at this in a minute and decide, oh, that's not what I wanted. Okay. So you get the crease of the fold of the fleshy parts coming together, and then it's going, there's the calf muscles in the back here, so it's going to follow that anatomy. And then the soleus kind of is a little straighter muscle going down to the Achilles heel. So the main bulk of your cowl, again, the belly of the muscle is going to be closer to the torso. So on the lower leg, the belly of the muscle is closer to the knee, and then the leg tapers down to get lighter so that you can lift your leg with ease. And you're going to have a lot thinner and more tendon than muscle as you get down into the base. Okay. Now, there's a leaf in front of his ankle, so I don't actually see how much of this is in shadow, looking at the reference, but I can kind of make some of this up for a bit. Now, I go in, and underneath his foot, there is an up for the arch, and then going down in a longer shape for the toe, okay? Now, most of that, even the side of the foot here, seems to be really in a halftone. Even the shadow between the toes there seems to be more of a halftone, okay? And this I want to be careful, because as I'm creating my soft edge, I don't want to move the darks too much into the light. So I usually start with the darks if I have a light Campitura, because then I immediately know I have a no-tan design. I know this is shadow, this is light. If I have a dark Campitura, as I did on the painting I showed you before that I did of, oh gosh, Magda, I would start with the light first, because that would contrast against the dark Campitura, and I would be able to see what I'm going. Then you work your way towards the midtones. But I like to establish what the extremes are first. It really helps with relationships. All right. Oh, Gregorio. So then I want to finish with the leg here. And I know one thing that I meant to do and I didn't do is I meant to round the heel here. Because it's not going to be a right angle, or it's not even a right angle there, it's wider than that, but I didn't want this sharp point at the heel. So when I go in and do the shadow, first of all, underneath the ankle, it's not going to be just perfect, because there's light bouncing into the roundness of the ankle here. So I'm going to pull this, and you can see it's a triangle shape here. Do you see the triangle? And it's mainly dark against the edge of the leg here. And then it goes up, and then the leaves cover it, so you don't see what's going on here, but I suppose I could do that. But of course I would make this larger, because his knee joint is right about here, and the goodness, the thigh, the calf muscles here. So he's going to have a straightness, and then it's going to go back a little bit to go into the big knee joint and cruise in. So if I want to err on the side of that sort of thing, I can. Okay, and then I want to come down into this section, weave it more paint. So I'm going to round the heel a little bit, give it some more rock and roll and some lusciousness, and come in with the bottom. But I'm going to round the heel a little bit. Now, in this case, I'm leaving a halo, which is what I told you before I was trying to avoid when I did the background. But, you know, it's a small one, and stuff happens. You work it out. Okay. I want to soften this edge a bit. Alright, so looking around to the figure, the only thing that's really dark is again the palm of his hand here. But I do see that there's, because the palm has the meaty muscles, again, closer to the wrist, closer to the torso. This, as it's upside down, this sticking out is going to catch a little bit of light. So these muscles here, so I'm going to leave a little space up there to do some creative stuff. And then the rest of his hand, his little pinky goes down. I'm not as worried about designing the shape of the hands and frankly even the feet right now, because those are smaller details and entities to themselves. Right now I need the big picture for things. And the other thing is that our brains really see in volume more than they see in shape. So what happens is I can really do my best to feel that my line drawing is where I want it to be and looks good. But it's not really until I put the tones in and I can see volume that my brain will go, oh, that foot's too large. Oh, that negative space here is not really as right as you thought. And oh, this arm, you know, and so it really helps to see these things as they go along. Now, the other thing I'm going to point out is this is my dark brush. I won't use this for the lights. I'm going to use a brand new clean brush for the lights. It's very, very easy to muddy up your lights, and you don't want to do that, especially on your subject. So right now I'm going to stop and take a picture of this, a still picture, because I'm trying to do a process thing later for a video, and I'll be back in a wee bit. Thank you very much. Ciao. Alright, I want to try to do this stage all when the paint is wet to wet, if I can pull it off, because I don't want this to dry without the ability to actually soften everything. So right now this is my white Campitura board, and it's perfectly dry, so there's nothing really to blend with here. And part of the fun about oil painting is this whole squishy thing like clay, is mushing things back together and stuff like that. If this were acrylic, this would already be dry in this short period of time, and I'd be going, oh. So you really got to work it to make acrylic look like it has soft edges, and not look like it has soft edges, give it soft edges. But in this case, I've got a paint that's going to stay wet for a wee bit, so I have some time to do this, and I want to take advantage of that. Now, of my two lighter skin tones, again, I'm going to start with the lightest. I'm a little worried that if I start with the darkest and creep up into the light, I'm going to miss it somehow, and the figure's going to turn out very, very dark. So I'm going to start with the lightest here, and put that on a brush. You see, my brush is fairly large, but again, I'm gonna, maybe I could do a larger one, but when I get to these smaller details, this will be just fine, and that'll work. So I want to go in, and now the lightest light, when I squint again, the lightest light in the figure, the shoulder, because it's closer to the sun as well. This is a nice big broad plane, so the thigh, it's not that far different from this as far as the sun goes, although theoretically this is closer to the sun, it should be brighter. But this is also a big wide space here, the top of the thigh, so it's going to be an overall take up more real estate, whereas this light, the light on the edge of the arm and right at the shoulder here may be the same brightness as this, but it turns rather quickly as the shoulder starts to roll into the back, okay? But I'm going to leave the part at the edge here not quite as light as this, so I'm going to stay a little bit back in here, okay? And again, that's a choice what to do. Now, The interesting thing is, as the light changes back in here, he's getting some green reflected into his skin. So that's going to make this a colder, and I can see very clearly in the print even that this is a colder blue. But colder blue, colder skin tone. Right now, I'm not worried about that. It's too soon for me to be concerned about such things. So, and also the ears are going to have pink in them, as I mentioned before, about places where blood goes. But these are, again, details, and we're not ready for that yet. One of the things it's beautiful about getting to the end of learning the whole process is that the more you do this, the more you know where you're going. And for me, my brain needs to know the big process picture. I can't stand it when people tell me you're on a need-to-know basis and let's talk about that later. No, I want to know I need to know the big picture so that I can fit myself into it. And also when I get stuck, I have an idea of what I can do to make things kind of good. Okay? When I was a supervisor, I cross-trained all my people because my feeling was that if they know what the end result is supposed to be, I'm going to take my dark here a little bit and get that crease for the elbow here. It empowers them to make decisions if somebody doesn't happen to be around because they didn't share something because you didn't need to know it. Well, when you do need to know it and nobody's there, everything stops, and that's just annoying. And it's useless, and people are better empowered, I think. At least I feel better empowered. I don't know about other people, but... And this flake white, this paint, it's amazing that this flake white replacement is what it is. It's not flake white. Flake white is the lead paint, and I don't know the history of that, why they call it flake white instead of just the lead white, but I'm sure it's out there on the internet. I don't tend to be as interested in a lot of that history stuff as a lot of painters love to read about all this sort of thing, and I'm more interested in the emotions that people have and why they do the things they do. So it kind of makes me a little bit of a different animal, I think. Okay, remember I said I didn't want that hand to go too small. So right now I'm trying to look at the proportions again, and I'm pushing out over this here, because do you see right now I've got this halo? Well, I'm purposely keeping that a little bit because these fingers have some lights on it. But I need to be careful with that because, again, I don't want him to have a small hand. And no, that's not really a President Trump joke, but do what you like with it. This has nothing to do with painting, but I personally don't like rudeness against things. My father always taught my brothers and me that we could cut each other down all we want to, but we have to follow a couple of rules, and those are that you don't make fun of somebody for something that someone can't change. Obviously, it's not the dimension of your hand. It's not like you ate so many tacos or ice cream that you could have dieted. You know, stuff like that is, you can't change that. You can't control. That's more bone than it is anything else. So I just think those sort of things are petty and rude and have no place in anything, especially when you're talking about a politician, because typically with any politician, there are a lot more things that we can complain about as far as the actions the person has chosen to do. So I'm not really big on that whole nastiness of getting behind someone, a personal dig at somebody. I just don't really see the point of that. So there you go. Now, at this point, I know that my wrist and my forearm are different tones, but goodness, this stuff is really fighting me. But right now I want to just get something kind of in there. I'm going to go in here. Now, I'm shortening his arm a little bit, but I really don't want to have this come to a point like that. I just don't like that. So I'm going to change it and hope that it works. And the other thing is, even though I did talk about not leaving the halos, it's very few people, I would imagine, do things perfectly the first time. And painting is a bit humbling in that it seems that you spend a lot of time correcting, and you kind of just get used to that's the way it's going to go. And anyhow, so let's go in and cover some real estate again. I'm not going to worry about halftones yet. I don't necessarily need to worry about the cold and warm of the skin at this point. I can do that at a later date. Now I can see that, goodness, what happened to my paper towel? There it is. I usually keep a paper towel in my hand. To have this shoulder come and match up this arm is going this way. I need to make sure that I don't pull this beyond the line of this, okay? So right there I just put too much skin, and that needs to go away. And that'll all happen because as I get going on things. So again, I'm sort of just putting this stuff in here, knowing that the next batch of steps is to start refining one part or another. And you'll find that as you go along, you're going to be working in smaller sections while the paint is wet. Okay, note that I'm going into the darks, but I'm not really obliterating them. I don't want to have too much of a mixture at this point. Okay. And here I'll be refining this shape and get that curve back into the elbow there, okay? And again, I'm allowing a hard line to happen there, planning ahead. And then, okay. I'm going to go in with the dark, a bit of a skin tone here to put in this curve of the thing. And I'm a little concerned about this leg because I feel I don't like this rock and roll that I have sort of going on here. And the knee joint is the largest joint in the body, so I need to make sure I don't make that too small in comparison to his elbow and his torso and that sort of thing. But I want to make sure that I don't have a bulging thigh going on because he's just a kid, you know. All right, so I need to wipe off that dark there. I just wanted to put the dark in there so I kind of remember where my position is, but again, it's not a killer of things if I get it wrong. Okay. And again, I'm staying away from the top because I'm sort of combining different kind of steps here. And I don't want to, this has white in it, so I want to kind of make sure I'm covering up this green here. Although, frankly, it may be that I've got the leg maybe needs to taper, not have a bulge right here, you see, because that's really actually a straight. He's got right above this crease here, it's kind of working on my shapes as I go. Because shape, the best example is if you painted an apple, or maybe you'd like to do a pear as the example. If you painted a pear in purple, which pears are not, you would still, your brain would still recognize it as a pear because of the shape. The shape always trumps everything else, or certainly color, when it comes to identification of objects. And the human body, in this case, would be an object. Okay, goodness, this paint it's really thickens up quickly. All right, so let's just scribble in some of this stuff. And the same here. Now, you may notice that I'm avoiding a little bit, actually touching too much of the shadow. Okay? And a lot of that is because I don't want my lights to get mixed up into this. I don't want the dark paint pulled into the lights. And it looks like there's a wee bit of a dark right underneath where the shadow of the leg is curving under above this rock. But I think it's thin enough that I can kind of wait a bit for this. Okay. Now, I can also see I'm painting thin and I'm getting a little bit of transparency, which doesn't necessarily bother me. But I do, again, I'm trying to paint with paint because it can lead to different problems sometimes. I like the look though. Now I'm just sort of doing a fan brush thing on this because part of me is a little worried that this paint, this flake white replacement is so, I don't know what the word is, that I'm a little concerned that it's going to, now see, here's the thing, this is actually a reflected light. It shouldn't, I'm doing that wrong. I should keep that as part of the overall dark plane, is not separate this. The shadow actually should go straight across the back. So this was a mistake, don't do that. Alright, so let's continue with the lights here. I'm going to come back down into the leg. And maybe there's a wee bit showing up through there. And I'm going to add a little bit of white to it because this part is, the downward leg is actually catching quite a bit of light from the sun. I mean, because the plane is going, it's directly perpendicular to the ray of the sun, and that makes it get brighter than the ones that are going at a slight angle away. Okay, so pull this in. Do you see how much bluer this is than that? That looks a little more orangey, and this is a colder, and that's all because of the addition of white. The addition of white and also the addition of black makes the hue turn colder. The hue meaning the actual redness, orange, blueness of the family of color, I guess. Okay, but as I go down here, I want to be getting darker. I can't really tell if I can see some foot there, but I think I'll work some of that out as I get into the rest of the painting. Goodness, stuff is fighting. But you know, also, it may not be just the paint itself that's fighting me, because when you paint on wood, it really does tend to suck up all the juices first. So it could be that that's part of what my situation is. Okay, now the big toe. Remember, I shortened this foot before. So the big toe is coming up a little bit this way. And then it comes, the toe here is not curling up like this one is, so it's a little bit longer, and then I have these two are coming back until then I get to the pinky at this stage. And what do I see here? Here I see a very good straight line. Put a wee bit of spirits in there. Okay. Just checking to make sure that the film is still recording. I have to download this phone quite often to make sure that I have space, because when you paint live like this, you can't really go back and redo it, can you? And again, I would love your feedback on stuff. I would love your questions and comments, and disagree with me a lot if you like. That's fine too, because I don't have a problem with discussions like that. And I also believe that most things are relative, so it doesn't offend me a bit. But yeah, it would be fun to have some interaction with stuff. And if you appreciate these things, please let me know that too, because otherwise I don't need to. I find it difficult to spend all this much time doing the video thing when I could actually be making more paintings or sculpture. And everything's relative. So, yeah. Give it time to find an audience if people are interested in this, and if not, then I can go back to being my private self. Okay, so I've started working in, maybe ahead of myself here, but since I've got the lights on the brush, I'm going to come in here. There's some lights on the feet here as the sun's hitting that again. So I'm just developing some of the overall general roundness of the forms. And obviously they're going to all have to be worked in detail, but that's what the layers of painting is going to be all about. Okay, so then it's really kind of bright in here. Again, I don't want too much white in the skin tone, because then he becomes Pasty Boy. And Pasty Boy is not so luscious, is he? I want skin to be beautiful. The reason I like to paint the body is so that we can appreciate the amazing thing. It's such a design, I mean, it's really wonderful, but with the goal is I'm kind of sick of the violence, and if we could just really appreciate the magic that is with us, how could we actually hurt somebody? It's just creepy. I never can get my head around these things. Okay, so now I'm going to throw in some white again before this is all dried up. And there's a big fold of flesh there, so it's going to catch light as the roundness of that happens. And then I'm going to throw in this and start to... Now, oh goodness, throw that in there while I put some more paint out. The edge here is a good edge to have sharp, because the background is so far away from it, and it's a nice distinguishing form to have. Now some people, depending on your time and also, of course, the size of the figure, leave a little space between your light and then your dark. Let those go ahead and dry if they need to overnight or whatever. Then when you come in, you put more wet here, and then you blend with your transition tones, because wet on wet is when all the really great mixing happens. Doing the dry is when you're going to be doing the glazing or the mixing of things of that nature. So again, knowing your materials and how they best function helps you be creative in your use of them and use their strengths more than not. So I'm just going to keep on developing this. I can see that I've done the angle of this. This thumb, it's more at an angle like this. And then it has a highlight hitting. But those are such small details that to get that on my big fat brush here is not going to be an efficient use of that. And frankly, I don't want to be using that much time for that sort of thing when I can come back later. And I will be coming back later. So again, the forearm and a hand, they're different forms, but they're connected, and there's not really, unless his arm is actually tilted back and you see a crease or a dramatic plane change, there's not enough there that I want a really super hard edge on. It is going to be an edge, but it's not going to be as hard and dramatic as that. I've drawn a pencil mark there, but I see that there's a shadow because, again, the belly of the muscle is up here. A little shadow there as it goes in, the tendons wrap around and do their thing. So in a way, if you want to think of this, what you're really doing is kind of note-taking about things that you're going to address in the future. And let's put this arm in now. He's got a, you can tell on a undeveloped body, meaning not a bodybuilder, that we still have the undulations. I can still tell exactly where his deltoid, the triangle muscle, there's a little angle right there that happens, and then the change of the plane goes out for the bicep. And even though he's not a bodybuilder, you still see these muscles because they're inserting into the bone, and that's a deep place for them to go, and you can just tell. It's just something to watch for. But as I said before, the main thing is to not exaggerate those things so much. All right, so let's give him a lighter back here. And now on the neck is a cylinder, okay? But as a cylinder with the light coming in at a certain direction, you're going to see that the cylinder is not going to be straight lit here because the light's not coming from this direction. The light's coming from here. So that means that the cylinder of the neck is going to have a little bit more of a highlight right here. But also because the trapezius muscle goes up and it separates into two. There's one over here and one over here, and then there's a little bit of an indent here, and it's quite obvious there that you get that kind of dent going on. I say obvious, but maybe I'm being a little bit, maybe nothing's obvious unless you've actually started to study and look at these things. And then there's a lightness here that goes for the muscle right in along from behind the ear that reaches down into the clavicle bone. I find when I talk I really have a hard time remembering words, so if I say the wrong thing, please call me on it, because I'm a little bit worried about my brain at times. Seems to be manifesting itself more and more, that if I think about something about, oh, don't take that, or you want to take that, as soon as I think don't take that when you're after this piece, whatever, I get into the other room and go, wait, what did I just do? I just took the thing I told myself not to do. I find that really, really annoying. At least I'm still at the stage where I recognize that's what's going on, but I'm concerned because my brain didn't used to be quite that bad. Okay, so the trapezius is going up into the neck here, and what we're seeing a little bit here is the side of his face coming in there. All right, so again, I want to soften all these edges before I leave this section of town, and I can actually pull this in a little bit with his shoulder blades coming down. Okay, and you might notice that instead of coming at the brush coming at it this way, more often than not, I'm actually going more parallel to the canvas itself, okay? I find that helps me release paint from the paintbrush to put it on more places. All right, so I want some light coming down in here too, and a little bit of his belly, and get underneath. But his belly is going to be slightly, you're going to be able to distinguish the edge between where the belly ends and the leg begins. And pull that down into there and then cut this across. Because the separation of the legs is another great place to have a sharp edge so that I can see the difference between the two forms. But this sort of just comes in around here. It comes from up in there. Technically, the art schools in Florence seem to feel that you really don't need to know much about anatomy, because they teach you to to draw what is in front of you. In other words, copying the shapes. And the anatomy gets to be a bonus thing. But for me, I understand that, and that's a place to start. But the thing is, when you know more about anatomy, your seeing becomes more intelligent, more informed, and that you can start to anticipate stuff, and you can also start looking for things, and it can help you decide that if you didn't know if a tone was the same or not, you can sort of logic your way on what the body's going to do. And the other time is when you end up being a little bit like me at this point where I live. I don't have access to models as I used to, and Austin, Texas was fantastic. It still is fantastic as far as this goes, but you can paint a model any day of the week. There's always something going on around town in the groups there, and it's just amazing to have such a resource like that and get together with other artists and paint. I don't really like to be around people when I'm serious about creating my work, but at the same time, it's a solitary thing, and I find that the life drawing is not only good practice and also a way to test out models, because I don't usually invite models into my home if I don't know that they're actually professional models. Professional in the sense that they're there to model art, because I know a lot of models would feel like they're not particularly professional, but you know, if they show up and they do the job and they're interested in what they're doing and stuff, and they're never late, they're polite, and you know, this kind of thing, that's pretty much what professional means to me. All right, so soften the edges again here. So you can see that I really bounce around quite a lot with things, but at the same time I'm trying to be efficient because I'm working on the same tones while I have that brush in my hand, okay? And I know that I'm going to be correcting things later, but I also know how this works. So again, I want to make sure that I'm not getting too many brush strokes, because although maybe I should leave it because that'll help with the rocks and be consistent with stuff. But I want to make sure that I do this vertical thing, because I really, really, really hate the glare that comes. And when I do a side stroke, it always shows up, and then it becomes, that's your center point, focal point for things. All right, so I'm going to stick this brush down in here for a minute. Let me take a break, and I'll be back.